So I'm standing in my kitchen. This is now my third lime wash project. I just finished this a few days ago. And this project, if you don't know anything about lime wash paint, I made another video on this channel that kind of goes a little bit more in depth about what lime wash is. But in short, it's a ground up limestone mixed with a color pigment and water. And those three elements combined create your lime wash paint. Now, paint's a little deceiving because it's really more of a stain than it is a paint. Traditional paints, you just roll on and you want to get it on in a thick coat. With lime wash, the key ingredient is to make sure that you have a nice surface to work with and that you prime it properly. And the priming has to be done with lime paint primer. It can't be any primer. You can't just go and buy primer at the hardware store. You want to find a primer that's been designed specifically to prep the surface for lime wash paint. So the paint that I used here in the kitchen was from the same company that I used in my previous video called Bauwerk. The two colors that I selected from them for this project was, one is Desert Fig here, this more orange tinted color behind me, and the other was Bone, and that is this more tan, almost beige color on the other wall. And the key with lime wash is that you really want to make sure that the surface that you begin with is the surface that you like the texture of. So originally I had orange peel texture, which is kind of that bumpy looking texture that you see sometimes on walls. And I needed to smooth that out. So the way that I smoothed it out, I'll show you in this video, was I used joint compound mud. So I bought a big 5-gallon joint compound mud bucket from Home Depot. It was like 15 bucks. And I used a trowel and a hawk to apply that to all the walls. And then after that was set, then that took about 24 hours to dry, and then I primed it with lime paint primer. And I did 2 coats of the primer, and then I did 2 coats of lime wash using the masonry brush that I bought from Bauwerk. So yeah, this is the video of each step of the process to show you how I got here. So I started by putting a drop cloth down to catch any paint that might spill or any of the joint compound. So this is the joint compound mud, that's a hawk, and this is a trowel, which are 2 items that I used to cover up the orange peel texture that you can see here. I wanted to make sure that it was a flat, smooth surface. So you take one of these little joint knives and you apply it to your hawk, and then you take the trowel and you slowly start applying it onto the wall. So I realized after I started doing this process with the trowel that the trowel left markings on either side that were really difficult to smooth out afterwards. So I went from using a trowel to using a joint compound knife, like a 10-inch joint compound knife, and that proved to be much better at creating a smooth surface on the wall. You can see that I'm applying it on fairly thick and then scraping it so that way you're seeing a little bit of the wall behind it, a little bit of the original wall, but I'm just flattening the surface of the wall out. So the goal here is not to completely cover it 100%, but to just make it flat. So I'm basically filling in the valleys of the wall. If you think of it like mountaintops and valleys, I'm just filling in the valleys, and it's okay if a little bit of the peaks of the wall are showing, because I'll be covering that up with primer. So this is what it looked like after I had done the joint compound all over the kitchen. And now it's time for priming. So for priming, you want to do it in 2 coats. I've found that the lime paint adheres best to the wall when there's a good amount of lime primer for it to adhere to. And for this stage, it can go on with a roller, so it goes on a little bit quicker than it does when you're applying with a masonry brush. So I was able to just roll on quickly the 2 coats of primer. Next, I was able to jump into the lime wash. So I got the lime wash shipped from Bauwerk in Germany, and as you can see, it comes very liquidy, it's very watery, and all of the color pigmentation and the limestone is at the bottom. And because it had been in shipment and it had been sitting for a while, it's very thick. So you want to take a paint stir and you really want to get in there and you want to make sure that all of that color pigmentation and all of that, you can see how thick it is when it sits for a while. It's almost like mud. So you really want to stir it up until you don't feel any of those chunks anymore. And then you're able to go into the lime painting. So you want to fill your brush up just an inch or so and make sure you dry the brush off to where it's not dripping anymore. You really don't want a thick, drippy paint brush. And then once you have that, you can start applying it to the wall. The best way to apply it is to do it in these sort of cloud-like textures, and you don't want to apply right on top of your previous coat. You want to start in a different section of the wall, and then you want to merge the edges of your paint with your previous coats. The goal is to stretch the paint as far as it'll go. So you don't want to get a bunch of paint in a concentrated area. You want to extend the paint on the brush as far as there's paint left to be spread on the wall. And on this wall you'll see is when I started to apply the color Bone. The previous color being Desert Fig, a little bit darker. Bone went on a little bit lighter. And this one really was enhanced after its second coat. You really started to see some of the beige and the tan come out in the second coat. First coat, you could see it a little bit. What I liked about it was that it's very subtle and that you don't immediately, your eyes aren't immediately drawn to it in the room. But if you look long enough, you start to see the depth of color of the wall. And so now I'm starting my second coat of Desert Fig. And after the second coat, some of the contrast started to even out a little bit. But as the paint dries, it dries lighter and you start to see some of those contrasting elements. Now again, in between each time you apply the paint, literally in between every time you add new paint to your brush, you need to stir because that sediment will settle at the bottom. So in between each stroke of filling up your brush, you're gonna wanna, so just keep a paint stick in your paint can because you're gonna wanna keep stirring it every single time in between each new application. One trick that I learned was that if you're seeing streakiness on the wall, just keep on spreading it. Don't stop spreading it until the streakiness is gone. I know that sometimes when you apply it, it can look a little streaky, and sometimes it helps to let the paint dry just a little bit and then go back with your brush and spread it to get rid of the streakiness. And so after 2 coats, there you have it. You have 2 coats of primer, 2 coats of lime wash, leaving you with a beautiful depth of color. So that was a story of how the lime wash in this kitchen came to life. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm gonna be releasing another video about lime washing my living room and dining room with some slightly different colors, also from Bauwerk.